Brandon Aiyuk and whether he leaves the San Francisco 49ers via trade. We've heard about Pittsburgh. We've heard other teams involved as well. Browns, for example. Where do you think he ends up, and how does it impact the Browns or the Pittsburgh Steelers if he ends up on either of those teams?
Latest reports indicate Pittsburgh has the inside track, and we'll see if it comes through. But this would be a major impact because when you hear Mike Tomlin talk about his receiving core in Pittsburgh, he tends to talk about what great guys they are and how hard they work because he really doesn't have a number one receiver. No offense to George Pickens. And they don't really have good number two or number three receivers. So you talk about Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Quez Watkins. I mean, this is arguably the worst receiving core in the league. And you add a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, assuming they don't have to give up George Pickens, but just some draft picks to get him. I mean, he is a devastating player in terms of yards after the catch, the way he runs his routes, and the way he blocks, too. He's a tremendous blocker, and he's a true number one receiver. So I would be fading Pittsburgh and saying this is going to be the first losing season in Mike Tomlin's tenure. But if they get Brandon Aiyuk, to me, that's a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you could say a lot for the Browns or the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike McClure, if Ayuk leaves, obviously there's an impact on the 49ers as well, but where do you think he lands and where's the impact felt the most?
Yeah, I think the impact is where he's likely to land. I think it's Pittsburgh. I think they've got the inside track, as Larry mentioned, and I think he makes a significant impact to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he makes almost no impact to the Cleveland Browns. When I look at the Cleveland Browns, they actually have a pretty solid wide receiver core. Things can get a little messy there and just the style of play. So I personally don't think it makes much of an impact on Cleveland, but I think it makes a massive impact on the Pittsburgh Steelers, particularly when you look up and down the schedule. When you see that Steelers schedule, their final 8 games of the year, they probably, if they don't have Brandon Ayuk, will not be favored in a single one of them. So I think this is a very, very big move potentially for the Pittsburgh Steelers to be competitive in the second half of the season. I love the move if they're able to pull it off.
Prop stars as if this division needed to get any more difficult. Already arguably the best division in football, maybe adding a superstar receiver. Your thoughts as to where Brandon Ayuk goes and what the impact is?
First and foremost, I believe Brandon Aiyuk is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the NFL. He was the most efficient wide receiver in the splash zone last season. That is deep down the middle of the field, the most valuable target you have in the NFL. So he will make a massive impact whether he lands in Pittsburgh or Cleveland. If he goes to Pittsburgh, I'm not sure schematically and with their personnel, they really could take advantage of Brandon Aiyuk and really target him in a high volume role in that splash zone. I'd have more confidence actually on Cleveland. I just don't think their personnel, Cleveland, I don't think Cleveland has a wide receiver. We're talking about Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy. They both line up close to the line of scrimmage or the middle of the field. So I think there would be a role for Brandon Aiyuk. His real life impact would be significant. From a statistical standpoint, it would be a downgrade either scenario or either landing spot. But I do prefer Cleveland as a landing spot. If Pittsburgh does acquire him, I think he would make a big impact, but it might not show up on his individual stat sheet.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of agree with you, prop stars, that I actually think Cleveland's live to potentially, as a long shot, to potentially win that division. You add Brandon Ayuk to that, and the possibility that Deshaun Watson really needed a full year to recover from what was a pretty complex shoulder surgery. I think this Browns team is pretty dynamic, particularly with Brandon Ayuk. I don't know that I think the Steelers make the playoffs regardless with Brandon Ayuk. I could be wrong about that. Their schedule, like Mike McClure said, very tough at the end of the season.